In 1958, a writer named Frank Waters traveled into the high desert of northern Arizona and sat with Hopi elders for years. Not weeks, not a single interview. Years. Working alongside a Hopi interpreter named Oswald White Bear Fredericks, Waters gathered testimony that most of the outside world had never been permitted to hear in full. What came out of those conversations became one of the most detailed outside accounts of Hopi cosmology ever assembled. And buried inside that testimony was a warning. The elders described a blue star, not yet visible in the sky, that would one day appear. When it did, they said, it would mark a turning point, a signal that humanity had reached the edge of a choice that could not be walked back from. Waters wrote it down exactly as it was given. He did not interpret it as metaphor. Neither did the elders who spoke it. If this is the kind of investigation you have been looking for, subscribe now and stay with me, because what those elders actually said has never been properly examined by anyone with the authority to examine it. Now here is the detail that most coverage of this prophecy never reaches. In Waters' own field notes, later donated to a university archive where they have sat largely unexamined, there is a passage where an elder describes the sign not simply as a star. He describes it as something that would be seen by all people at once, in every land, on the same night. Sit with that phrase for a moment, before photography, before telegraphy, before broadcast media of any kind. The phrase, seen by all people at once on the same night, was not a verifiable claim. The technology required to actually confirm that every person on Earth witnessed the same event on the same night did not exist until the 20th century. Which means whoever formulated that specific description was either anticipating a future in which global simultaneous visibility could be confirmed, or preserving a memory of something so large and so bright that the tradition carried it forward as the most significant celestial event in human memory. That detail has been in that archive since Waters donated his field notes. Nobody has formally examined it. 40 miles from where those conversations took place stands a formation known as Prophecy Rock, a stretch of sandstone near the village of Old Arabi, one of the oldest continuously inhabited settlements in North America, occupied for over 1,000 years without interruption. Carved into that rock are symbols that predate any written record of who made them or when. Among the images, a long horizontal line representing a path. The path splits into two roads. Figures walk toward a choice between them. Above the split, a circle, a star. The Hopi say these carvings are ancient. There is no peer-reviewed study that contradicts them, because there is no peer-reviewed study at all. Prophecy Rock has never been comprehensively dated. The rock varnish, the dark patina that forms on exposed sandstone across centuries, suggests significant age. But rock varnish dating is imprecise, and no formal scientific analysis of the site has ever been published in any academic journal, which means nobody outside the Hopi community can currently say with confidence when those carvings were made. The star was already carved into that rock when Waters arrived in 1958. It was already there when the first outside researchers began documenting Hopi culture in the late 19th century. How long it had been there before that, nobody has measured. Now the specific sequence the elders described to Waters, because the blue star is not an isolated image in the Hopi tradition. It is the final signal in a sequence. The elders described a series of events they called the Great Purification, signs that would unfold in a specific order before the emergence into what they call the fifth world, each sign marking a stage, each stage moving humanity closer to the choice carved into the rock at Old Arabi. The blue star was the last sign, not the first, not an early warning, the signal that the choice had arrived. The elders who described this to Waters in 1958 were not speaking casually. They were transmitting something they understood to be preserved knowledge. carried through the clan system across an unknown number of generations before it was ever written down by an outsider. That kind of transmission does not happen accidentally. It happens through deliberate institutional effort across centuries. The same deliberate effort that maintained the astronomical sophistication at Chaco Canyon, that preserved the Pleiades ceremonial calendar, that kept the sun watching stations calibrated across generations of trained observers. The testimony exists in an archive in northern Arizona. The field notes exist. The rock carvings exist. The star symbol is still carved into prophecy rock above the split path near Old Arabi. What does not exist is any serious institutional engagement with what any of them actually describe. And the reason that engagement never happened is not what most people assume. It is not dramatic. It is not a classified file or a sealed archive or an institutional conspiracy. It is something quieter and in many ways more effective. And that is where this investigation goes next. Before anyone takes the Blue Star Prophecy seriously, Powell, or dismisses it, there is a baseline question that needs to be settled first. Were the Hopi capable of serious astronomical knowledge, not ceremonial decoration, not seasonal folklore? Serious, precise, sustained astronomical observation passed down across generations, with enough accuracy to still function as designed today? The answer is documented, peer-reviewed, undisputed, and it changes everything about how the prophecy should be examined. Chaco Canyon. The great houses built there, identified by Hopi oral tradition itself as constructed by their own ancestors during an earlier phase of migration, are aligned to solar and lunar cycles with a precision that required sustained observation across multiple generations to calibrate. This is not interpretation. This is measured, published in peer-reviewed journals, accepted without controversy by mainstream archaeology. The sun dagger at Fajada Butte, a spiral petroglyph that marks solstices and equinoxes through the precise movement of light across the carving at specific times of year, required centuries of careful observation to design. The geometry works. It still works today. A civilization capable of building that did not do so accidentally. It required institutional knowledge, trained observers passing accumulated data across generations with enough fidelity that the precision survived the transfer intact. If the people who built Chaco were tracking celestial cycles at that level of accuracy centuries before European contact, the idea that their descendants preserved a specific prophecy tied to the future appearance of a star is not a leap into fantasy. It is the expected output of a tradition that had already demonstrated exactly that level of sustained astronomical sophistication. Now the Pleiades. Throughout Hopi ceremonial life, the star cluster known as the Pleiades holds a specific, well-documented role. It appears in Kaihina ceremonies, in the timing of ritual observances, in oral tradition as a marker connected to origin, migration, and renewal. This is not disputed. It is one of the more thoroughly studied elements of Hopi astronomy. But here is the detail almost nobody connects, thousands of miles from Hopi territory. In the Hopewell burial mounds of the Ohio Valley, copper and mica ornaments recovered from sites dating back roughly 2,000 years repeatedly incorporate 7-point star motifs, matching the Pleiades cluster, in a completely separate archaeological tradition. Separated from the Hopi by geography, by centuries, by every conventional boundary the migration timeline draws between them. Two unconnected traditions, both organizing sacred knowledge around the same 7 stars. In any other field, that convergence would immediately generate a funded research question. In this field, it gets filed under coincidence and moved past without elaboration. But convergences like that do not appear randomly. They appear when two traditions share something deeper than the conventional timeline accounts for: a common astronomical inheritance, a shared origin point, a connection the official migration models were not designed to accommodate. Now the sun-watching stations. The Hopi maintained physical observation points, specific locations from which trained watchers tracked the position of the sunrise against fixed landscape features across the full calendar year. Not occasionally, continuously, as an institutional responsibility held by specific individuals whose role was passed down through specific family lines. This determined planting times, ceremony schedules, and the precise timing of ritual observances that governed the entire agricultural and spiritual calendar of the community. This is applied astronomical science, institutional, precise, sustained across enough generations that the stations still function as designed. A tradition capable of maintaining that level of observational precision across centuries is not a tradition that preserves astronomical knowledge casually. When the Hopi elders described a blue star that would appear as a specific signal at a specific moment, they were speaking from within a tradition that had already demonstrated it could track the sky with measurable precision across generations. The question is not whether they were capable. The capability is proven. The question is what exactly they said, and why the institutions equipped to examine it have consistently declined to do so. Here is the answer hiding in plain sight. Archaeoastronomy, the academic discipline that studies ancient astronomical knowledge, operates on measurable, verifiable alignments, sun daggers, solstice markers, geometric precision that can be photographed, calculated, and published. Prophecy resists that methodology by definition. An academic discipline built on falsifiable claims has no clean framework for evaluating a tradition that says something will happen. It can study that the prophecy exists. It cannot, within its own rules, study whether the prophecy is accurate. So the blue star gets filed under religious and cultural tradition, worthy of respect, not considered a testable historical claim, and the astronomical sophistication that surrounds it, that gives it context, that places it inside a tradition of serious sustained sky watching across centuries, gets studied separately without ever being placed in the same room as the prophecy it belongs to. The Chaco alignments in one category, the blue star in another, the Pleiades motifs in a third, never examined together, never asked what they are all pointing at when held in the same frame. That separation is not accidental. It is the normal operation of institutional categories that were not designed for a body of knowledge that crosses every boundary they drew. Frank Waters was not an anthropologist. That single fact became the mechanism through which everything he documented in 1958 was quietly set aside by the institutions that would otherwise have been obligated to examine it. Not destroyed, not classified, set aside, with the efficiency that only institutional indifference can produce. Waters was a novelist and independent researcher. His 1963 book was met with divided reception inside professional anthropology. Some praised it, a rare respectfully gathered record of testimony almost never shared with outsiders at that level of detail. Others criticized it for blending genuine oral tradition with Waters' own literary interpretation, making it impossible to separate what the elders said from what the author shaped. That ambiguity gave institutional archaeology a clean exit, not because the testimony was false, because the documentation method did not meet the standard required for serious academic engagement. The testimony exists. The pathway to examining it was closed before the book was published. Then the New Age movement arrived. Waters' book became enormously popular outside academic circles, folded into a framework that had nothing to do with what the elders told him in 1958. Ancient astronaut programming, lost civilization theories, frameworks that credentialed researchers cannot engage with without appearing to validate everything surrounding them. The blue star prophecy got swept into all of it. The prophecy itself had not changed. The context surrounding it had become toxic to anyone whose professional standing depended on credibility. This is how legitimate testimony gets buried, not through a classified file, through proximity, through association, through a professional culture that cannot afford to be seen standing next to certain questions, regardless of whether those questions deserve to be asked. Waters' field notes, the actual words from those 1958 conversations, were donated to a university archive, available to researchers, largely unexamined. The passage describing the star seen by all people at once in every land on the same night sits in those notes, unanalyzed, unfunded, unchallenged. Prophecy rock has never been the subject of a published dating study. Rock varnish analysis has been applied across the American Southwest. Not here, no grant written, no institution identified it as a priority. The Hopi Cultural Preservation Office has maintained a consistent position for decades. Certain knowledge is meant to be shared on Hopi terms, not extracted, tested, and returned stripped of the context that gives it meaning. Not confirmation, not denial. A request for restraint. Skeptics read that silence as evidence there is nothing worth protecting. The other reading is what you would expect from a people who watch their children taken to boarding schools designed to erase the oral transmission systems carrying this knowledge forward, who watch ceremonies suppressed, sacred objects catalogued as artifacts in institutions with no relationship to their meaning, a community that has watched what happens when indigenous knowledge enters the public domain without protective context, does not share that knowledge casually. The silence gets read by the outside world as absence of content, rather than evidence of protection. The testimony is in the archive, the carvings are on the rock, the dating technology exists, and the pattern keeping all of it unexamined is not a decision made anywhere. It is the accumulated result of institutional categories, methodological standards, cultural contamination, and professional incentives that produce the same outcome as active suppression, without requiring anyone to have intended it. The knowledge stays where it was placed, waiting for a framework capable of holding it. There is one detail in the Blue Star prophecy that separates it from every other sign in the Great Purification sequence. Every other sign describes something observable within a limited geographic range. The blue star is different. Every land, every person, the same night. That is not the language of seasonal astronomy, not ceremonial timing, not local observation. It is the language of something so large and so visible that the tradition preserved it as the defining celestial event in human memory. Now the candidate nobody has formally examined, a supernova visible to the naked eye, bright enough to be seen in daylight, documented independently by civilizations on every inhabited continent, preserved in oral traditions from cultures with no contact with each other. The supernova of 1054 CE was recorded by Chinese astronomers, by Arab astronomers, and appears in rock art across the American Southwest, including sites the Hopi identify as their own ancestors' work. It was visible in daylight for 23 days. It appeared without warning. It was seen simultaneously across every inhabited continent on the same night. The Hopi tradition preserving a memory of something seen by all people at once, originating from a people whose ancestors documented the 1054 event in their own rock art, is not a coincidence that can be set aside without explanation. Nobody has formally examined whether the Blue Star prophecy and the 1054 supernova are describing the same event from opposite ends of time. Not because the question is unanswerable, because nobody has placed both bodies of evidence in the same room. Here is the full picture when everything is held together. The Chaco alignments establish the ancestral Hopi were tracking the sky with measurable precision centuries before European contact. The Pleiades motif, appearing identically in Hopi ceremony and Hopewell burial objects thousands of miles away, establishes a convergence between separate traditions organizing knowledge around the same astronomical reference point. The 1958 testimony establishes a specific astronomical prophecy preserved in enough detail to identify its key characteristics. The seen by all at once detail establishes the prophecy describes a singular global event, not metaphor, not seasonal marker, a specific phenomenon of sufficient scale to be simultaneously visible across every inhabited continent. The 1054 supernova establishes that exactly such an event occurred within the ancestral Hopi occupation period, documented on every continent, appearing in rock art at sites the Hopi identify as their ancestors' work. 5 bodies of evidence, 5 separate institutional categories, never examined as a single unified question. Prophecy Rock still stands near Old Arabi. The carvings undated, the star still carved above the split path. Waters' field notes still in the archive, available, largely unread. The 1054 supernova records sitting in Chinese and Arab archives alongside southwestern rock art. The Hopi oral traditions still held within the community, still transmitted, still protected. The question of whether those 4 bodies of evidence are describing the same event from 4 different directions has never been formally asked by anyone with the institutional standing to pursue it. The sky above Old Arabi looks the same tonight as it did in 1958. The star the elders described, seen by all people at once, may have already appeared 11 centuries ago, and the tradition that preserved the memory of it has been waiting ever since for someone to recognize what they were actually looking at.